امروز یک مهمان جدید به برنامه پیوسته آقای استیون ترنر. آقای ترنر یه مشاور هستش در خاورمیانه و با استارتاپ ها و کمپانی های کوچیک و آنترپرنورهای در خاورمیانه کار میکنه و به اونا کمک میکنه که دسترسی داشته باشن به بازار آمریکا. جدا از این آقای ترنر یه دکترا داره و یه کارشناسه در تمام روابط واقعا اجتماعی، آنترپرنوری، بیزینسی، تجاری بین آمریکا و خاورمیانه و در این زمینه هم خیلی کار کردن و مقاله نوشتن در مورد برجام و روابط ایران با خاورمیانه و کشورهای دیگه، موضوعهای اقتصادی ایران. خلاصه می‌خواستیم ایشون رو دعوت کنیم به برنامه‌مون و واقعا یه ذره از نظرهای ایشون بهره برداری کنیم و یه ذره بیشتر آگاه بشیم که روابط مثلا تجاری و اقتصادی نه تنها ایران و خاورمیانه واقعا در چه وضعیت هستش و آتیش چیه. اکثر این برنامه رو به انگلیسی اجرا میکنیم، اما قبل از پایان برنامه به فارسی برمیگردیم. Stephen Terner, welcome to our program. Thank you so much. I know you speak a little bit of Farsi. You speak so many languages. I don't want to take our viewers, Kurdish and Arabic and Hebrew and of course English and a little Spanish. But tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in this field? What drives you to be in this particular field? Because working in entrepreneurship cultivation in the Middle East is a tough field. It's kind of thankless. It's not always rewarding, but you've chosen to be in this field to help, as you say, entrepreneurs put food on the table in the Middle East. That's such an admirable quality and passion project and an important activity. We really want to learn what you do and how you do it.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this stuff, and happy to be able to speak with somebody who knows what I'm talking about these kinds of issues. Again, I'm going to try to keep it in English because I don't want to insult anybody with my poor accents or jumbled languages. But so my background originally is academia. I focused on political decision making, specifically Iranian political decision making. And American political decision-making and U.S.-Iran relations. And one of the most important things that I learned when, trying to understand why leaders make decisions is that often they're guided by economic policy. So what decision they're going to make is going to depend on who's going to benefit from it financially and strengthen their position. So after spending several years writing policy recommendations and trying to raise awareness about this issue or that issue, I realized, well, if they're making decisions based on economics, why am I bothering talking to them and trying to convince them of something? Why don't I just try to create an economic reality? So for the past, I guess a couple of years at this point, I have been reaching out to entrepreneurs in the Middle East, working particularly intensely right now with Iraqi and Kurdish entrepreneurs, and a little bit with Turkish and Emiratis to find, first of all, what projects are they working on? And is there a way that the U.S. private sector can help them? And if there is, I am putting them in touch with these U.S. partners and trying to strengthen the economic bonds between our private sector and theirs, because what better way to create change than by helping everybody put food on the table in the meantime. So for the most part, in Iraq especially, there's such a big gap. Now, after decades of war seem to be behind them, and they're putting together, they're rebuilding their economy. There are a lot of small needs that young entrepreneurs identify, and then start to build an app or a company to address that issue. And with population, I think there's about 42 million there now. There's a huge market. It's largely untapped because they don't have the infrastructure yet. So the most helpful thing that I can do for them, in their opinion right now, is to start off by connecting them with the U.S. tech ecosystem and the U.S. entrepreneurial ecosystem so they can learn the fundamentals of how to build a business, how to operate, how to scale, how to bring in investment. Once they've done that, they're looking for assistance in sourcing foreign investments, such as from the United States. So I'll teach them how to build pitch decks, help them prepare for investor interviews, know what questions to ask, know what calculations to have at hand. I find them investors to work with. I'm constantly calling U.S. VCs and other sorts of equity investors and asking them what their portfolios look like, what kinds of companies they're looking for, what stages, what the parameters are. And so that when I find a company in the Middle East that fits their profile, I can immediately connect them and help them get the funding they need to expand.
Wow. So now, the world often mixes up Iran and Iraq. Even the State Department, I just learned that they have a new assistant Secretary of State for Iran and Iraq.
Okay.
I think, right? Victoria Taylor is her name. I'm not saying whatever happens in Iraq will eventually translate into what happens in Iran, but just from your experience, of course, a war-torn country, all kinds of difficulty. It's half the size of Iran from a population standpoint, all kinds of different economics and cultural, everybody knows it. But my two questions are this: what are you discovering? What are the Iraqi entrepreneurs able to offer to American investors? And how do American investors look at investing in a country like Iraq?
Well, first of all, American investors have quite a lot that they could benefit from Iraqi investors. And the reasons for that are, first of all, since these startups are in the early stages of development and there's a lot of risk involved, there's a big opportunity for taking large equity positions. So they're further incentivizing them to take the risks. Second, the tech that they're developing, innovation comes from need. And there's so many needs there that they've been putting together so many different platforms and solutions to these issues that, things that we take for granted in the United States, they built out private sector operations to handle them. For example, I was speaking with a startup yesterday that has developed an app to help small retail grocery stores source inventory from wholesale agricultural producers. So it really streamlines their process of getting products, helps them keep their costs low, makes it easier for them to compete with the big guys. I mean, that's something that, would be of great interest in the United States because, we've developed this economic situation where monopolies are taking over everything. As a result, there's less and less competition in the market. Individuals that, would fill these kinds of jobs can't because they're priced out almost immediately. But these kinds of programs are designed to help smaller operators. So why can't we see that they're doing that? Help them build out their company and then help them expand here and to help our own small businesses.
Right.
Even an app like that an example we could take from that is building out an app that allows individuals in the United States to purchase items from mom and pop shops on the corner instead of always going to Amazon and always buying from big box stores. If smaller operators had their prices listed, then I think that people in the U.S. market would be willing to pay a small premium to get something, locally from a small company than having to give all of their business to Amazon.
Right, right. So this is a fast-moving. I know you've been focusing on Iraq and the entrepreneurship and the startup scene in Iraq recently. It's like any startup scene, it's evolving. It's growing. Like we could make one assessment today, and then in 2 months it could be a little different. Where do you see it growing towards? And do you see that as any kind of a prediction of? And I know again, Iran's startup culture is entirely different, just massive. I've in touch with many different folks, and they're just. I feel they're leaps and bounds ahead in many different ways. They're far different than where Iraq is. But just the process, just looking at these two countries next to each other, where Iraq is going, could that be where the opportunities that Iran may see if the politics wasn't there?
Well, honestly, I think that Iraq has a lot to learn from Iran's example in this sense, because the similarities are that they're both large markets that the private sector has had to fill in the gaps from the public sector, and so small entrepreneurs have had to develop all of these opportunities for themselves. I mean, Iran has been isolated for most of the world for so long that they can't simply bring in outside things. They have to, create their own industries. So, this isolation, has forced, quite a lot of self-reliance on the economy. So, in that sense, that I think the Iranian entrepreneurs can learn a lot from those examples. I think that in the long term, if Iran should ever open up to, or be allowed to re-enter the global economy, then, being able to connect with the Iraqi entrepreneurs and learn about, accessing European and North American markets that would help them because they'd have the connections established already. Um, so there are a lot of differences, but there are a lot of similarities. I don't know when Iran is going to have the opportunity to rejoin the global economy, but I think that when they do, they're going to have most of their things in place already. They're not going to have to go through this early stage development process. They're going to have all of these companies that are immediately ready to expand and to scale, especially in that part of the world, especially in the Middle East and South Asia.
Right. And again, not trying to not sound biased, but I feel like the Iranian diaspora all over the world is probably the #1 most willing partner with the Iranian startup scene. There's been several preludes, as you may know, iBridges, and there's all kinds of different tech groups, and the Iranian community in the California Silicon Valley is just enormously well connected and established, and very engaged in what's happening in Iran. We've had many of them on this show, and they just can't wait to reestablish ties.
Right.
So you're right. Iran's a little bit further ahead from that standpoint than Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Iran is just kind of the private sector, at least, or the small operators are just kind of waiting for the dam to break, and then they're going to be able to, really just flood the markets. And I hope that they're able to, because there are a lot of people that are suffering there, waiting for the politicians to do something, and I don't think politicians have any interest in, reconciling this.
No. Probably on both sides. I think.
No, absolutely. No, listen, a government is set up to preserve the status quo.
Right.
So, any adjustments to their politics is going to take time. It's going to have to be very calculated and deliberate. They're going to want the opportunities to go to certain specific sect of people. So, no, I don't, you have to operate within the law when it comes to these kinds of relationships, but I don't like waiting for the government. The government's not there to innovate.
Right, right. No, 100%. And I mean, what we're talking about is economic diplomacy, trade diplomacy, building bridges with entrepreneurs, maybe in advance of political rapprochement. And of course, as you know, a lot of the diaspora is against any kind of political engagement. But at the same time, I'm in the general diaspora, I don't hear a lot of alternatives being proposed as to what do we do about those entrepreneurs, those individuals in Iran that are not political. They simply want, as you said, want to put food on the table. They're entrepreneurs, they're innovators, nothing to do with the government. And yet we have these crippling sanctions all around them where anything made in Iran is against the law. So
politics follows economics, not the other way around. So in order to get politics to change, you're going to have to create an economic situation that it has so much opportunity that politicians won't be able to say no, that it'll be more in their interests to go along with it than to go against it. And so, building up the opportunities in Iraq is a step in that direction. I think eventually some sanctions will be removed in Iran, and then the opportunities will become so obvious to everybody that they'll be in a rush to lift the other ones, regardless of, political implications or security repercussions. And honestly, I think it'll be in everybody's interests to work together rather than to fight at that point. But you have to build up the economies. Economic diplomacy, like you said, is the way to get things going.
Right. And on Iraq, looking at Iraq as the example that's already happening, there is a U.S. embassy in Iraq. Are there any U.S. institutions helping you or helping make these connections, or are you kind of on your own?
There are quite a lot of U.S. institutions that are involved there. The U.S. aid is actually providing a lot of funding to people. One of the programs, or one of the issues in Iraq is that, now that there's, peace and stability, which is expected to sustain, and the economy is developing, they realize that there are all these people, but there's a shortage of people that are trained in, professional management skills, human resources, factory oversight, logistics, and those sorts. So there are a lot of professional trainers in Iraq that are being funded by USAID to train teams and to train companies in these operations. So, there are opportunities. There are U.S. institutions there. There are some U.S. players there, but there's a big divide between having U.S. individuals and institutions there and actually working with the United States itself. Because, U.S. institutions can provide grants, but there's different business cultures. So, and in the U.S. private sector and the Iraqi private sector, if they want to work together, they don't really know who to go to even reach out to each other. They don't really honestly even know what the opportunities are from one side to the next, because Iraq has been so busy with trying to, Iraqis have been busy trying to stay alive and secure for the past several decades. They haven't been looking at U.S. business culture and trying to find ways to enter the market. And the United States, as much opportunity as there is here, there's less of an incentive to even look outside the borders. So they have no concept that Iraq is, developing and that there are opportunities, let alone who they would want to work with or how. So my primary function is to act as a cultural liaison. I start off by asking people in the Middle East, not on the US, but people in the Middle East, what needs they have, and then I'll find a US partner for them. And then once I found the partner, I will cultivate and oversee the relationship so that the expectations are not as far off base. Because in the United States there's this culture of everything needing to be happening immediately in business, and having to work 7 days a week and having to go over and beyond. And in the Middle East, as you know, the pace is more relaxed, and there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, they don't feel that they're being pressured every second of every day, like in the US, where everybody has to be independent. There's much more of a social support system in Iraq, so they have the time to think and to make more calculated and deliberate decisions. Second, in the US, there are contracts that are put in place to protect people. So they know that if they operate within these limits, then their investments will be secured, their capital will be protected. In Iraq, they don't have that kind of system. So they're not able simply to rely on a contract being enforced. Instead, when they do business with somebody, they have to find people to vouch for them. They go through family connections or friendly connections, because they know that if they're working with somebody, then there's a more than a good chance that they'll actually come through, because otherwise it will damage their interpersonal relationships, and that's not something they're willing to do. So there's different expectations, there are different ways of operations. In the Middle East, regardless of what country you're in, you're not going to answer an email the second you get it from the United States, because why would you? There's no reason for it. That's insanity. Right. And in the United States, that's interpreted as, oh, I guess they're not interested in doing business. Well, no, it's not that they're not interested in doing business. It's just they have a life.
Right.
Their entire existence is not based on answering emails. So you have to teach both sides what to expect from the other, so that they don't end up, fighting or misreading the relationship and then breaking down when there is a lot of opportunity. If they're able to work together, somebody has to be able to show them how.
Well, thank God you are doing what you're doing. We didn't even get into some of the anti-bribery and anti-corruption, the cultural issues of in the Middle East, the bureaucracy of institutions in the Middle East versus the U.S. And you just explained, just the email example, I think, is indicative enough of exactly what happens. Is I think enough said there. Unfortunately, our time is near an end. Stephen Terner, please come back. We want to keep talking and learning about the Middle East business, and I really think economic diplomacy, my personal opinion, not diasporas or the Iranian community at large, but I've always believed in economic diplomacy. Politics follows economic diplomacy, economic bridge building, until the world is able to tolerate itself, and you can have the type of democracies that we all cherish and value in the West. But until then, please keep us in your thoughts. Please let's stay connected, and whatever we can do to help bring the Middle East and the West closer together in this conversation, we are at your service.
All right.